It started the way so many tragedies do, with someone not coming home. On a cold night in January 1972, in a quiet neighborhood outside of Chicago, 16-year-old Timothy McCoy waved goodbye to his parents for what should have been a simple trip. A bus ride, a shift at the local store, maybe a bite to eat afterward. Normal, harmless, but he never came back. And that silence, that unbearable, hollow silence, would stretch for weeks, months, until silence turned to something darker. Until his name became one of dozens. At the time, there were no flashing headlines. No news trucks swarming the street. Just a boy who vanished. And a killer who was only getting started. He looked like anyone's neighbor. A big, broad man with a heavy laugh and heavier secrets. John Wayne Gacy ran a construction company. He hosted barbecues. He knew the mayor. He even dressed up as a clown for children's birthday parties. Pogo the Clown, he called himself. Bright red nose, painted smile. The kids laughed, and the adults smiled, not knowing they were letting a monster into their homes. But behind that grin, behind the grease paint and the costume, was a man unraveling. You see, Gacy was no stranger to the law. Years before the murders began, he'd served time for sodomy in Iowa, lured a teenage boy into his car, then did what predators do. But he was released early. No one tracked him. No one warned the neighborhood when he moved back to Illinois. He blended in. That was his talent. He didn't hunt strangers in alleyways. He hunted in daylight, at bus stops, in parking lots, sometimes right in his own driveway. Always boys, always young, always alone. Timothy McCoy was just the beginning. The one Gacy would later refer to as his first mistake. Because in some twisted corner of his mind, he believed there were rules to what he did, justifications, boundaries. But murder has no rules, and monsters have no lines they won't cross. He said it happened after a misunderstanding, claimed McCoy pulled a knife on him. But the truth was in the basement, the crawl space. Gacy lived in a modest ranch-style house in Norwood Park Township. Cozy from the outside, clean-cut lawn, white siding. But beneath the floorboards was a world no one saw. A cramped, shallow crawl space just a few feet high, dirt floor, pipes running low across the ceiling. The kind of place you'd never think to look, unless you were looking for bodies. And that's where McCoy ended up, wrapped in plastic, buried under layers of soil, the first of many. But for years, no one knew. He got bolder, picked up hitchhikers, offered jobs to kids at bus terminals, said he'd pay cash for help with construction. He even hired some to work for his company, PDM Contractors. He'd invite them home, joke with them, feed them, and then they'd vanish. The story spread in whispers. Parents warned their sons to avoid certain neighborhoods. Boys told their friends not to trust the man in the big car with the bigger smile. But still, no one stopped him. Why? Because he was smart, charming. He played the role. He schmoozed the police. He donated to political campaigns. He even had pictures of himself shaking hands with the First Lady. Who would suspect the clown? But secrets rot even in silence. And Gacy's house began to smell. Neighbors complained, said it was sewage, maybe a dead animal under the house. He blamed a broken pipe. The smell would come and go. But by the summer of 1976, it was constant. People crossed the street when they walked by. Still, nothing happened. Because the system isn't built to see danger in plain sight, especially when it smiles at you. And so, he kept killing. He perfected his method. Lured the boys in. Handcuffed them under the guise of a magic trick. Once the cuffs clicked, the game changed. He called it the rope trick. A loop of rope twisted into a tourniquet. Fast, clean, silent. And each time he buried the body himself. Crawled into that cramped space. Dug with his bare hands. Sweat pouring, breathing heavy, dirt in his lungs. Then back upstairs. Wash up, smile, repeat. By the end of 1977, there were over a dozen boys beneath that house. But still, no one knew, until one got away. His name was Jeffrey Rignall, and what happened to him didn't fit Gacy's usual pattern. Because Rignall survived. Gacy had picked him up on the street, drugged him, assaulted him, left him for dead in Lincoln Park. But Rignall lived, and he remembered enough to describe the car, the man, the smell, the clown paintings on the wall. He went to the police. They didn't believe him, filed it away as another drugged-up story. No follow-up, no warrant, no arrest. And so, Gacy kept going. Then came December 1978. Robert Piest was 15, a good kid, worked at a pharmacy, told his mom he'd be home shortly, just needed to talk to a contractor about a job. A man named Gacy. He was never seen again, but this time the mother called the police, insisted they look into it, said Robert had mentioned the contractor's name. A detective followed up, and something didn't add up. The contractor said he'd never met the boy, said he was out that day, but his story kept changing. They got a warrant, not to arrest but to search, and when they entered 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, the truth finally began to rise. Not all at once, just clues, a smell, a trapdoor, pair of handcuffs, a class ring, the crawl space. It wasn't just dirt anymore. And when the digging started, the bodies came up. One, then another, then 10, then 20. Boys, teens, bones still bound in rope. Some so decomposed they could only be identified by dental records. The house became a crime scene. The street was lined with reporters. Neighbors stood in shock. Parents wept on camera. Gacy was arrested, charged, and he confessed to 33. But the question wasn't just how. It was how for so long. How did no one see it? Or worse, how many saw pieces and looked away? Because it's easy to ignore evil when it wears a smile. It's easy to miss the monster when he hands out balloons. But now the mask was off. And as the first coffins were carried out from beneath that house, the world began to understand the depth of what had happened. This wasn't just a serial killer. This was a system that let him hide. And he almost got away with it. The first responders had been called for a wellness check. Cora Jennings hadn't shown up for her bridal gown fitting. Something completely unlike her. She'd missed a hair appointment too, and her phone hadn't pinged any locations since the night before. Her best friend, Maeve Holland, was the one who called it in. At first, the dispatcher thought it was a standard case of pre-wedding stress. But then Maeve mentioned the smell. "It's like something rotting," she said on the call. "And the house is locked. All the curtains are drawn. Her car's still here." When officers arrived at the cozy craftsman-style home on Grovewood Lane, the front door was indeed locked. No signs of forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Everything was in place. Bouquet samples still on the kitchen counter, the wedding planner book open on the coffee table, and the lights in the hallway left on. As if someone had simply stepped out for groceries and never came back. But that smell. Detective Amy Vance would later say it was the smell that told her the story before she even saw the scene. It crept through the floorboards, rising up like something ancient and angry, the kind of smell you never forget, the kind that stays in your clothes, your hair, your memory. They checked every room. Upstairs, the bed was made, makeup bags open, half a lipstick swipe on the mirror like Cora had paused mid-preparation. In the bathroom, her wedding day perfume sat unopened. Downstairs, nothing seemed disturbed, but when they opened the door to the basement, everything changed. The basement was unusually cold, the kind of cold that made your breath fog, even in the middle of May. The officers descended slowly, flashlights cutting through the darkness. That's when they saw the freezer. It was a standalone industrial freezer, tucked behind a row of laundry baskets and half-folded linens. The cord ran to an extension outlet along the wall. At first, it looked like a storage chest, but the duct tape across the edges said otherwise. Heavy-duty tape, layers of it. They peeled it back, flinching at the sound. The lid groaned open, and inside was her wedding dress, perfectly folded, clean, not a wrinkle in sight. But underneath the delicate ivory silk, something else. Flesh. Flesh so pale it almost blended in with the fabric. Frozen stiff, bruising around the neck. Her fingers curled tight as if gripping something in her last moment. Cora, dead. The scream Maeve let out when they told her would echo down Grovewood Lane for hours. She collapsed on the neighbor's porch, the wind knocking out of her like she'd been shot. Detective Vance ordered the scene secured immediately. No one in or out. Not until forensics could comb every inch of that house. The medical examiner's preliminary findings were simple but disturbing. Cora had been strangled. No signs of struggle, no broken nails, no defensive wounds. Which meant she trusted the person who did it, or they caught her completely off guard. More chilling was the time of death, estimated between 8 and 10 p.m. the night before. Cora was supposed to meet her fiancé, Ethan Caldwell, at 7 p.m. for a wedding photo test shoot. He said she never showed. But now the timeline didn't make sense. Detective Vance requested Ethan come in for questioning. He arrived the next morning, looking devastated. He wore a dark suit and a black tie. Not a wrinkle on him. Eyes red, but dry. "I loved her," he told the officers, his voice cracking just enough. "We were going to build a life. Who would do this?" Maeve sat in the hallway outside the interrogation room, listening through the glass with Vance. She didn't speak, but her jaw clenched tighter with every word Ethan said. "Did you come by the house that night?" Vance asked him. "No," Ethan replied. "She texted me at 6:40 and said she needed some alone time. Stress, you know? Pre-wedding stuff. I figured she was just overwhelmed. I waited at the shoot spot for a while, then went home." "And you didn't follow up? Call her?" "I did," he nodded. "Twice. No answer. I figured she'd cooled down by morning." Detective Vance slid a phone across the table. Cora's phone. "Mind unlocking it?" Ethan hesitated. "I don't know her passcode, but Maeve did." She stepped in, keyed it in, and opened the message thread. There was no 6:40 p.m. message. No text from Cora to Ethan that night. Nothing. Vance locked eyes with him. "You sure about that text?" Ethan blinked slowly. "Maybe she deleted it?" She was emotional. That's when the first crack showed. Maeve leaned in. Cora wasn't emotional. She was meticulous. If she deleted anything, it wasn't by accident. Ethan's composure slipped. He was released, pending further investigation. No evidence yet. No confession. Just suspicion. But that night, Vance pulled Maeve aside. "We got the surveillance footage from a neighbor's Nest cam. Take a look." At 6:57 p.m., Cora could be seen opening her front door. She wasn't crying. She wasn't emotional. She was smiling. And standing in front of her, Ethan Caldwell, flowers in hand. Maeve whispered. He lied. The next few days unraveled like a slow-motion nightmare. Cora's funeral was scheduled within a week, per her parents' wishes. But Maeve couldn't sit still. She scoured every memory, every late-night chat, every little thing Cora had ever said about Ethan. "Sometimes I feel like he watches me sleep," Cora had once said with a laugh. "Like he doesn't blink." Creepy then, terrifying now. Maeve found Cora's old journal from college. She read it cover to cover. One entry stood out. "I love Ethan, but sometimes I feel like he's hiding behind a mask. Like I only know the version of him he wants me to see. What happens when I stop looking away?" Detective Vance, meanwhile, pulled Ethan's phone records. Texts deleted. Location services disabled. He'd used a burner phone the night of Cora's death. And then there was the freezer. It had been bought the week prior, by Ethan, using a joint credit card. He claimed it was for frozen wedding food. But Cora had told Maeve just days earlier, "We're not doing frozen. Ethan wants everything fresh, local, farm to table." And Ethan? He didn't cook. When Vance confronted him again, he tried to pivot. "You think I did this?" he spat. "You think I killed the woman I was going to marry?" But his anger was too practiced, too polished. Then came the final blow. The neighbor across the street, a retiree named Mrs. Langdon, came forward with more footage. She had a camera pointed at her driveway, which faced Cora's. At 8:03 p.m., she caught Ethan dragging something large and covered in fabric down the stairs into the basement. At 8:09 p.m., the basement light turned off. And at 8:14 p.m., Ethan walked out of the house alone, carrying a roll of duct tape. Detective Vance filed the warrant. Ethan Caldwell was arrested for the murder of Cora Jennings at 7:34 a.m. on what would have been their wedding day. The dress was laid over her body like a mockery, the final insult. Maeve watched from the car as they led him out in cuffs. And for a moment, she thought it was over. But later that night, as she packed up some of Cora's things, she found something else. A USB drive, taped beneath the kitchen sink, labeled, "To Maeve, if anything happens to me, look here." She plugged it into her laptop. A single file, encrypted. She entered the password she and Cora always used in college. It opened, and what she saw next made her stomach twist. A video, Ethan, staring directly into the camera, smiling. "Hello, Maeve," he said. "I knew you'd find this eventually." Then the screen went black. The video was only 38 seconds long. But for Maeve Holland, each second landed like a blow to the chest. Ethan Caldwell, framed by shadows and a bare wall, looked nothing like the charming groom-to-be the world had seen on social media. No tuxedo, no smile, just eyes like cold stone and a tone that sent chills up Maeve's spine. "If you're watching this, it means something went wrong," he began. "Or maybe it went exactly as planned. That depends on who you ask. But since you're here, Maeve, that probably means you're asking the wrong questions. Or maybe the right ones. Either way, it doesn't matter. Not anymore." Click. The video cut off. Just like that, Maeve sat frozen, her laptop humming quietly. The air in the room felt heavier now, like the walls themselves were listening. The video wasn't a confession. It wasn't even an explanation. It was a message, deliberate and chillingly composed. The kind that doesn't come from panic, but from planning. Like he knew she'd dig. Like he wanted her to. She replayed the clip. Again. Searching his eyes for answers, for remorse. There was none. She took the drive to Detective Amy Vance that same night. Vance played the video twice in silence before leaning back in her chair. "That man knew exactly what he was doing," she muttered. "And he wanted you to find this. But why?" Maeve didn't have the answer. Not yet. What she did have were questions. And one name that kept surfacing in Cora's old texts and journals. Dr. Camille Schuyler, a therapist Cora had seen briefly a year before the engagement. One she apparently stopped seeing without explanation. Maeve called her office. Disconnected. She Googled her. Nothing. Not nothing like no results. Nothing like she had never existed. But that wasn't the only lead. Cora's calendar had one more clue. A recurring entry every Wednesday night. Rosewood Group. Maeve tracked it down. A support group for survivors of intimate partner violence. Held at a church basement 2 towns over. Quiet. Anonymous. The kind of place someone like Cora would go to talk without being talked about. Maeve sat in the back that Wednesday listening. Faces filled the folding chairs. Some spoke. Some didn't. But all of them carried that same look. A quiet, haunted strength. She waited until the end before approaching the facilitator. "I'm looking for information about Cora Jennings," she said. "She came here regularly." The woman hesitated. "We don't share names." "She's gone," Maeve said. "Murdered." That changed everything. One woman stepped forward. Late 30s, wiry, with piercing eyes. "I knew her. She sat next to me every week for 6 months." "Did she ever talk about Ethan?" A slow nod. "Not by name, but we all knew. She was scared. Said he controlled everything. Her passwords, her schedule, even her food." "Did she ever say he hit her?" "No," the woman replied. "But she said something worse. That he made her feel like if she left, she'd disappear." Maeve left the church shaking. Back at her apartment, she pulled out one of the last things Cora had given her before she died. An old photo album from college. Between 2 pages, she found a folded piece of paper she hadn't noticed before. An address. No name. No explanation. Just an address in a town 3 hours north. Maeve didn't hesitate. She called Vance on the way. The detective agreed to meet her there. The house was run down. abandoned by the look of it. But inside, there were signs someone had lived there recently. A mattress, water bottles, and in the back room, photos, dozens of them, of Cora, some from public places, others that were clearly taken without her knowing, through windows, across streets, one from inside what looked like her yoga class, and in the center of the room on a corkboard, a timeline, her entire life mapped out, dates, locations, names of friends. Even Maeve's name was there. Vance stood beside her, stone-faced. "This wasn't just obsession," she whispered. "This was surveillance. This was control." In one corner of the board, scribbled in thick red marker, were the words, "The freezer is just the beginning." Maeve backed away slowly. The air in the room was suffocating. She looked at Vance. "We need to go public." But Vance shook her head. "Not yet. We still don't know how deep this goes. And if we make the wrong move, we might never know." Maeve wanted to scream, to tear the whole wall down. But she didn't. Instead, she took pictures. All of them. Then she noticed something else. A USB drive, identical to the one under Cora's sink. She took it home, hands shaking. Contained one file. A video. Again, Ethan. "Maeve," he said, "you're persistent. I respect that. But if you keep pulling, the whole thread unravels. And I don't think you're ready for what you'll find. Some stories are better left buried. Ask Cora." He smiled. "Or what's left of her." The screen went black. Maeve didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the wall. Ethan Caldwell had murdered her best friend. And now, he was just getting started. Maeve couldn't sleep. She watched the video a dozen times. Ethan's face frozen in that smug smile, his voice calm, too calm, as if this was all part of some grotesque game. "Hello, Maeve." Like he was expecting her. Like he wanted her to find it. Her fingers trembled as she hit pause for the 15th time. She couldn't stop hearing those words in her head. What scared her more was what might be after that first sentence. Because she hadn't watched the rest. Not yet. She wasn't ready. By morning, Maeve was pacing her living room, gripping a mug she hadn't sipped from. Sunlight streamed through the windows, mocking her with its warmth. Everything outside looked normal. People jogging, sprinklers ticking, the mail truck groaning up the street. But nothing was normal anymore. Cora was dead. Ethan was in jail. And Maeve was sitting on evidence that might explain why, but also maybe expose something even darker. She opened her laptop again. The video file sat there, waiting. She took a breath and hit play. The screen flickered. Ethan sat on a leather couch in what looked like a hotel room. Behind him, the blinds were drawn, and a single lamp cast shadows across his face. "I'm not stupid," he said, his voice smoother than before. "I know what people think. The sweet fiancé, the golden boy. But here's the truth, Maeve. Cora was never who you thought she was." Maeve's brow furrowed. Ethan leaned closer to the camera. "She found something. Something she wasn't supposed to. And she wouldn't let it go. Said she'd go to the police. So I made a decision." His voice didn't waver. Not once. "I'm not sorry." Maeve slammed the laptop shut. Her heart raced. She couldn't breathe. Ethan had just confessed to her. But there was more. The file was over 5 minutes long. She hadn't even watched a full minute. What the hell else was on it? Detective Vance needed to see it. She couldn't sit on this. She called her immediately. Within an hour, Vance was at Maeve's house, armed with gloves and a portable evidence bag. She took the laptop carefully, nodded once, and told Maeve she'd be in touch. Then she was gone. And Maeve was alone again. Hours passed. She tried reading, cleaning, even scrolling through social media. Nothing helped. Until Vance called back. "We need you to come in," she said. "Now." Maeve's stomach dropped. At the station, Vance pulled her into an empty conference room. The USB drive sat on the table beside a folder thick with printouts. "We watched the full video," Vance said quietly. Maeve nodded. "What else did he say?" Vance didn't answer. Instead, She opened the folder and spread out stills from the footage. The final frame made Maeve's blood run cold. Ethan holding a photograph of Maeve. "You're part of this now," Vance said. "He knew you'd look into it. He planned for you to." "Why?" Vance tapped the corner of the photo. "Because you were the only one who ever doubted him." Maeve sat down slowly. She stared at Ethan's eyes in the image. He wasn't just smiling. He was watching. The DA's office moved quickly. The confession was damning. Ethan's bail was denied. The trial date was set for 2 months out. But Maeve couldn't rest, because Ethan wasn't done. 2 days later, she received a letter in her mailbox. No return address, just her name. Inside was a single page. "You saw what I wanted you to see. Nothing more." Maeve ran it to Vance, who sent it for forensic testing. No prints, no DNA. But the postmark? It wasn't from the local jail. It was from a neighboring town 30 miles away. "Someone mailed it for him," Vance muttered. "Someone on the outside." Maeve's mind reeled. Who would help him? And why? The answer came that evening, when a name popped up on her phone she hadn't seen in years. Tristan Caldwell, Ethan's younger brother. She let it go to voicemail, but he called again and again. Finally, she answered. "Maeve." His voice was low, shaking. "We need to talk." She met him the next morning at a diner just outside town. Tristan looked thinner than she remembered. Gaunt, tired, but scared. "I didn't send the letter," he said immediately. "But I think I know who did." Maeve leaned in. "Who?" Tristan looked around, lowered his voice. "There's someone else." Ethan was seeing someone else. Before Cora. Maeve blinked. "That doesn't surprise me." "No, you don't understand." She was obsessed with him. When he left her for Cora, she didn't take it well. He slid a photo across the table. A woman, blonde, mid-30s, pale eyes that didn't blink. "Her name's Camilla Hart," he whispered. "She disappeared 6 months before he proposed to Cora. But I saw her 2 weeks ago, outside the courthouse." Maeve felt like the world tilted. "She's still alive?" He nodded. "And if she's the one sending letters, she's not done either." Detective Vance dug up Camilla's file. She had a history with Ethan, dated him for nearly 2 years. But their breakup was messy, violent. She filed a restraining order, then withdrew it, then disappeared. No official missing persons report. No foul play, just gone. Until now. Vance assigned 2 officers to quietly monitor the courthouse during Ethan's preliminary hearing. And sure enough, in the far corner of the parking lot, they spotted her. Camilla, watching. She bolted when they approached, but left behind a clue. Parking stub from a hotel 20 minutes away. When officers searched her room, they found maps, notes, dozens of photographs of Maeve, Cora, even Vance herself, and a journal, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Ethan said she had to go. Cora was in the way. He said it was our chance. But Maeve ruins everything. She doesn't know her place. Maeve read those lines and felt her chest tighten. She was a target. Again. The night before the trial, someone tried to break into Maeve's house. The alarm scared them off, but the back window was shattered. Footprints led through the garden and into the woods. Police responded quickly, but Maeve didn't sleep that night. Because taped to her bedroom mirror was another note. "You should have stayed quiet." Vance put her under protective custody immediately. "This isn't about just Cora anymore," she said. "This is about control." Ethan controlled her. He controlled Camilla. And now he's trying to control you. Maeve nodded slowly. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, but Vance could see the tremble in her hands. Opening day of the trial was a media circus. Cameras, protesters, supporters, curious onlookers. Inside, Ethan wore the same smug expression, like he'd already won. Maeve sat behind the prosecution, hands balled in her lap. When they played the video, the confession, he barely blinked. But when they introduced the evidence from Camilla's hotel room, something in his jaw twitched. The DA noticed. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Camilla was arrested 3 days into the trial, charged with conspiracy to tamper with evidence, stalking, and obstruction of justice. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she flipped. She took the stand, and her testimony shocked everyone. She described nights of manipulation, emotional abuse, how Ethan convinced her they were soulmates, that Cora was just a phase. He told me, she said, voice shaking, that she needed to disappear, that we'd be free afterward. The jury went pale. Ethan? He didn't move, but Maeve could see it now. He wasn't just a killer, he was a puppeteer, and the trial wasn't the end. It was just the beginning, because as Camilla stepped down from the witness box, she whispered one thing: there are more. And in that moment, Maeve felt the bottom drop out of her world. Camilla's words hung in the air like a noose tightening slowly around every neck in that courtroom. There are more. Maeve felt the temperature drop. Even the judge looked up, startled, as if someone had suddenly thrown ice water on the proceedings. Ethan remained motionless, his eyes locked forward, jaw clenched, a flicker of something dangerous twitching beneath the surface. Not panic, not fear, control. The trial halted for recess within moments of Camilla's declaration. The judge, flustered but composed, banged the gavel and ordered both counsels to chambers. Maeve sat frozen in her seat, hearing the buzz rise from the gallery as reporters began firing off texts and whispers. Detective Vance was already in motion. She wasn't bluffing, Vance said as she pulled Maeve into the hallway. She said, there are more. That means Ethan wasn't just planning something. He's been doing this. Maeve couldn't breathe. You think Cora wasn't the first? I think Cora might be the only one we know about because she was engaged to him. The pieces slammed into place like dominoes snapping into a deadly pattern. Camilla was taken back to holding, where a special interrogation was arranged. This time, she didn't hold back. Her eyes were sunken, lips dry, hands trembling as she clutched a styrofoam cup of coffee. Across the table sat Vance and an FBI agent who had flown in that morning after word of the trial hit national wires. He told me about them late at night, Camilla whispered. When he couldn't sleep, he would pace. He'd talk about the ones who disappointed him, girls who didn't listen, didn't stay. He said love had rules, and if they broke them, they had to pay. How many? Vance asked. Camilla closed her eyes. At least 3, maybe 4. He never said names, just places, details. He liked to talk about the quiet, how quiet they became. Do you know where? Camilla shook her head. No, but he kept things. He had a place, a storage unit, maybe. I'm not sure. I wasn't allowed near it. The FBI agent leaned forward. What kind of things did he keep? Camilla flinched. Jewelry, letters. He said they were memories. A search warrant was filed within hours. Maeve stayed glued to the updates, her heart a constant drumbeat of dread. When they located a unit registered under Ethan's college roommate's name, a man who died in a car accident 7 years earlier, it felt like fiction. But it wasn't. The unit was a small, unassuming rectangle nestled between a lawn care business and a fast food franchise. The kind of place people drove past every day and never thought twice about. Inside, they found a steel cabinet locked with a padlock. Inside the cabinet, evidence. 3 lockets, a charm bracelet, a pair of ballet slippers, stained and frayed. A sealed envelope labeled with just a date, March 11, 2017. DNA confirmed one belonged to a girl named Lila Ramirez, missing since spring break 2017. Her case had gone cold. She was last seen at a bookstore, place Ethan once worked. Another item, a keychain with initials carved in the plastic, BJ, Brielle Jameson, disappeared 2019. Last known contact, a man she met through a charity gala. Photos from that night showed Ethan standing in the background. The third item had no name, just a ring, small, child-sized. The horror spiraled deeper. By the time court resumed, the narrative had changed. Ethan Caldwell wasn't just on trial for the murder of Cora Jennings. He was now the suspect in a multi-jurisdictional investigation into the disappearances of at least 4 women over the last decade. Maeve sat beside Vance in stunned silence. Camilla's testimony was airtight now. Not the words of a scorned ex, but the key to unraveling a decade of deception. Ethan's demeanor finally cracked. During cross-examination, as the prosecution presented the storage unit photos, Ethan smiled. Not a soft smile. Predator's grin. "They were never supposed to find that," he said, loud enough for the courtroom to hear. Gasps echoed through the rows. The judge slammed his gavel. Reporters scrambled. Maeve turned away, nausea twisting in her gut. The trial became a spectacle. Every headline screamed the same thing. Groom turned predator. Cold-blooded killer hid victims in plain sight. More families came forward. More faces filled news bulletins. Girls who vanished without a trace. All of them somehow, in some way, connected to Ethan Caldwell. The wedding that never happened became the ceremony that unmasked a monster. Maeve, once just a bridesmaid, was now the anchor in a nationwide story of betrayal, obsession, and terror. She gave interviews, cried on camera, told the world what it was like to hug someone you thought was family, only to find out they were capable of evil. Detective Vance received commendations. The FBI expanded their investigation. But it didn't end there, because just 2 days after the trial concluded, with a life sentence and no chance of parole, Maeve received one last package. No return address, just a flash drive. This time, no video, just a folder titled, "For Later." Inside, photos of Maeve, sleeping, smiling at Cora's bridal shower, walking alone at night, and a single message typed in red. The game was never about her. It was always about you. Maeve screamed. Detectives swept her house. Again, they found no bugs, no cameras, nothing. But the message was clear. Even behind bars, Ethan Caldwell wasn't done. And Maeve would never sleep with the lights off again. The first snowfall of the season blanketed the town in silence. But Maeve couldn't feel the chill. Not when her blood ran colder than ice. "There are more." Camilla's words echoed through her mind like a chant she couldn't silence. Every breath felt heavier, like the truth was pressing down on her chest. She sat in her car outside the courthouse, unable to turn the key. The engine waited, but she couldn't move. Not yet. She had just watched a woman admit, under oath, that Ethan had talked about eliminating people before, that Cora wasn't the only one. And Camilla, the once vanished woman, hinted there were others. Detective Vance wasn't surprised. "Not anymore. That man," she'd said as she escorted Maeve to her temporary safe house, "has been hiding behind his smile for a decade, and I think we're just scratching the surface." Maeve sat on the worn couch, a blanket wrapped around her, as Vance laid out photos on the coffee table. 3 women, all missing. All had crossed paths with Ethan during college or shortly after. None had been declared deceased. Their cases were cold, forgotten. Camilla mentioned their names in her journal, Vance explained, tapping each image. Kelsey Granger, Dana Soto, Elise Renner. She didn't know them well, but she remembered Ethan speaking about them, sometimes cruelly, like they were distractions, mistakes. Maeve looked down at the women's faces. They were young, smiling, full of life, and now they were nothing but unsolved files. Why didn't anyone notice the pattern? Vance sighed. Because he never left fingerprints. No bodies, just ghosts. But Camilla was different. She broke his pattern. She had stayed, and now she was crumbling. Camilla sat alone in a holding cell. Maeve watched her through the glass, watched the way her eyes flicked constantly to the corners of the room, like she expected someone to emerge from the shadows. When Maeve walked in, she flinched. "You shouldn't be here," Camilla whispered. "I need answers," Maeve said. "You said there were more. Tell me everything." Camilla laughed. A hollow, brittle sound. "Everything? You couldn't handle everything." Maeve took a slow step forward. "Try me." There was silence. Then a low confession. "He kept a box." Maeve blinked. "What?" Camilla's hands trembled in her lap. "A wooden box. He called it the reliquary, said it held the pieces of his truth. He made me swear never to open it, but I did, once. What was inside? Camilla looked up. Her eyes were glassy. Photos, jewelry, notes, locks of hair. Maeve felt her stomach twist. Where is it now? Camilla closed her eyes. In his parents' lake house, the attic, behind the insulation. Maeve stood. I'm going there. You can't, Camilla whispered. He always said if anyone touched that box, he'd know. The lake house sat on a frozen inlet 2 hours from the city. Vance got the warrant within 24 hours. They didn't risk it. Took 2 unmarked cars, gloves, body cams, and a forensic team. Maeve rode in silence. The road twisted like a question with no answer. When they arrived, the house looked dead. Snow piled high. No footsteps. No sign of life. Vance knocked once. Then again. No response. The key, left by the real estate agent, slid into the lock. The house groaned open. It smelled of dust and pine. They moved quietly, each step creaking against the polished wood floors. Vance led Maeve up a narrow staircase, past empty picture frames and faded wallpaper. The attic hatch was at the end of a hallway. Vance climbed first. Maeve followed. It was dark, except for a small window cracked just enough to let moonlight in. Cobwebs hung like drapes. Boxes littered the floor. And then, behind a section of torn insulation, Vance found it. A wooden box, worn and nailed shut. She lifted it carefully, set it on the floor, pried it open. Inside, dozens of small bags. Photographs, women in various settings, unaware they were being watched. Locks of hair, labeled in Ethan's handwriting. A pair of earrings Maeve had seen on Cora the day before she disappeared. And at the bottom, a list. 10 names. 7 crossed out. 3 not. One of them was hers. Vance's hand flew to her radio. We need backup. And I want every inch of this place photographed. Maeve just stood there, staring. She was a name on a list. Target. The trial was suspended. The discovery changed everything. The DA filed additional charges. 3 jurisdictions reopened cases. And Ethan? Ethan was placed in solitary. But even locked away, his influence lingered. Another letter arrived. Typed. No fingerprints. No DNA. Just a single sentence. Even in a cage, I still choose the ending. Maeve threw the letter into the fireplace. But it didn't help. Camilla's mental health deteriorated quickly. She stopped eating, stopped speaking. She would stare at the walls for hours. A week later, she tried to harm herself. They moved her to a secure psychiatric unit. Maeve visited once. Camilla barely recognized her. I thought he loved me, she whispered. Maeve couldn't respond. There were no words. On the day the trial resumed, snow blanketed the courthouse steps. Maeve arrived early. She sat quietly as the prosecutor laid out the new evidence. Jurors wept when the contents of the reliquary box were revealed. Ethan? He sat still, his eyes scanning the courtroom, searching for her. When he found Maeve, he smiled. She didn't flinch. This time, he was afraid. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdict took 4 hours. Guilty. On all counts. The sentence: life without parole. As he was escorted out, Ethan turned once. His lips moved. No sound. But Maeve read them clearly. You were always mine. 6 months later, Maeve sat by the lake. Spring was coming. The ice had melted. New grass pushed through the earth. The town was healing. But Maeve, she carried the scars. Still, she had survived. She reached into her bag and pulled out Cora's locket. Cleaned. Preserved. She opened it. Inside was a photo of Cora and Maeve at the age of 12. Arms linked, grinning. Sisters by choice. Family by fate. She stood and tossed the locket into the lake. Farewell. A beginning. The house was sold. The trial was over. The media moved on. But Maeve didn't forget. She turned Ethan's reliquary into a memorial for the women. Each item cataloged. Honored. Not trophies. Stories. Lives. She started a foundation, Cora, Coalition for Outreach and Recovery of the Absent. It provided support for the families of missing women. She spoke at schools, at conferences. She told her story, because if there was one thing she learned, it was that monsters wear familiar faces. And betrayal doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it wears a tuxedo, sometimes it proposes with a ring, and sometimes it smiles in court. The court was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It was the tense, fragile silence that follows after a bomb goes off and the dust hasn't settled. Maeve sat in the front row, still, her face unreadable, but her heart a storm. The verdict had come down like thunder. Ethan Holloway, guilty on all counts. Life without the possibility of parole. But justice wasn't the same thing as closure. Not for Maeve. Not for the families of the other girls. Not for Cora. She still had questions. Questions that didn't get answered during testimony or cross-examinations. Questions only one person might be able to answer. Camilla Hart. After the trial, Camilla was moved from the psychiatric unit to a state-run rehabilitation center. She was stable, more lucid, but damaged. Ethan had shattered her identity, her will, her sense of self. Still, Maeve needed to see her. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about understanding. Vance tried to dissuade her. Camilla's mind is a maze. Be careful going in there. You might not find your way back out. But Maeve went anyway. The center was gray and sterile. Security at the front desk. Soft-spoken nurses in pale scrubs. The kind of place that looked like healing but felt like prison. Camilla sat in a common room, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. She didn't react when Maeve entered, didn't look up. Only when Maeve sat across from her did she finally speak. "You're real." Maeve nodded. "So are you." Camilla stared down at the tea. "He said I'd never see you again, that by the time the trial ended you'd be gone." Silenced. "I used to believe everything he said." "I know." A pause. "I wasn't trying to kill you that night. At the house." "I believe you." Camilla finally looked her in the eye. Her face was older than it should have been. Trauma had carved deep into her skin, like wind on stone. "You came for answers." "Yes." Camilla leaned back, breathing slowly. He had levels. Parts of himself he showed to certain people. Cora got the polished version. The one who opened doors and quoted poetry. I got the darkness. The cravings. Maeve felt her spine tighten. Cravings? He liked control. He needed it. And when he lost it, he punished people. He kept files, audio tapes, photos. He recorded himself talking about what he wanted to do to them. Where? Camilla blinked. That box wasn't the only one. Maeve drove straight to Vance. They got another warrant. This time for a safety deposit box Ethan's parents had in their name. Inside, more evidence. Dozens of cassettes, labeled by initials. Some were unrecognizable. Others matched the names of the women on the list. The tapes were sick. Whispered fantasies. Confessions. Some recorded while the girls were still alive. The DA reopened 2 cases immediately. Another body was found in a remote woodland area 2 towns over. The horror spread wider than anyone imagined. But it also brought attention, resources, federal agents, and more survivors. 2 women came forward. Both had dated Ethan during college. Both said they were stalked, manipulated, almost driven to suicide. One had attempted it. Ethan's web had stretched for years, and still he had smiled through every lie. Maeve spoke at a national summit on gender violence. Her foundation, Cora, had now helped over 50 families connect with investigators. She stood at the podium, hands trembling slightly, and told her story, not just Cora's, her own. "I loved her like a sister," she said, "and she died believing her future was safe in the hands of a man who was already planning how to end it. No one noticed, not because they weren't paying attention, but because he was that good at hiding." Silence, then standing ovation. She went back to her hotel room that night and cried until morning. 1 week later, she received a final letter. This one wasn't from Ethan. It was from his mother. "Dear Maeve, I was blind, and I am so sorry. We raised a son we didn't truly know. We saw what we wanted to see, not what was there. You didn't deserve any of this. Neither did the others. Please believe me when I say we would have burned the whole world down to save Cora, if we'd known. I hope you find peace. Margaret Holloway." Maeve folded the letter slowly, set it on her desk. She didn't cry. She didn't forgive. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. At Cora's grave, Maeve left a single white lily. The wind howled. Trees swayed. Snow clung to the corners of the headstone. "I found the rest of the story," Maeve whispered, "and I made sure they heard it." She stood there for a long time, then turned and walked away, not with closure, but with clarity. And sometimes that's the best justice can offer. The courtroom was empty now. The echoes of the trial, the testimonies, the verdict, the gasps had faded into dust. Maeve stood alone in the witness box, long after the gavel had fallen. Her hands trembled slightly as she ran her fingers along the polished wood. This was the place where her voice had cracked, where her eyes had met Ethan's for the last time, where the truth had finally been spoken out loud. But even now, even with the sentence delivered and the media frenzy dying down, there were pieces of her still frozen in time. Pieces still trapped in that house, in the attic, in the freezer with Cora's wedding dress. Cora. Her name came easier now. Not as a wound, but as a memory. Not just as a victim, but as a whole person. Maeve closed her eyes and whispered it. Cora. The town was quiet again. The snow had melted into spring runoff, revealing the muddy remains of a long, harsh winter. Green crept back into the world. The flowers Cora once planted along Maeve's porch had returned without invitation. Bold, blooming, the media calls had stopped. No more reporters outside her home. No more cameras. Just silence. It should have felt like peace. But it didn't. Maeve had learned that healing doesn't begin when the storm ends. It begins when you start walking through the ruins with both eyes open. That morning, she received a letter from Camilla's doctor. The handwriting was slanted, tired. She's remembering more. Some of it isn't coherent, but some of it is chilling. Maeve drove 2 hours to the facility without thinking twice. Camilla sat by the window in a chair that looked too big for her. Her skin was pale, her frame thinner than Maeve remembered. But her eyes, they were clear now, clearer than they'd ever been. "You came back," she said softly. Maeve nodded. "I never really left." They sat in silence for a long while. Birds chirped beyond the glass. Life carried on. "I dream about the lake house sometimes," Camilla whispered. "About the attic, about the box. But there was another one." Maeve turned. "Another box?" Camilla nodded slowly. Smaller, black, hidden beneath the floorboards. Maeve's stomach clenched. Camilla continued, her voice barely audible. "He said, if anyone ever found that one, the story would be finished. That it was the beginning and the end." Maeve contacted Detective Vance the moment she got back to her car. Within 48 hours, they had a new search warrant. This time, they brought a team equipped with heat scanners and floor-penetrating radar. And just as Camilla said, beneath the attic floorboards, they found it. A small, locked black box. Coded, reinforced, with a single engraved word on its surface. Promise. They brought it to the lab, but Maeve insisted she be there when they opened it. Vance hesitated but relented. She had earned that right. Inside the box were 3 things. A flash drive. A necklace Maeve had gifted Cora the night of her bridal shower. A handwritten note, folded into a triangle. Maeve opened the note first. The handwriting was Ethan's. To love is to own. To own is to preserve. And what is preserved is never truly gone. She's mine. She's always been. Even if I have to freeze time to keep her that way. Maeve dropped the note. Vance picked up the flash drive and slid it into a secured laptop. What they saw stopped everyone cold. Hundreds of videos, surveillance, footage from hidden cameras. Inside the lake house, inside the homes of multiple women. The date stamps stretched back years. all of them meticulously labeled. And then, they found a folder named Coraline. Inside, the last video was dated the night before Cora vanished. Maeve couldn't look away. The video began with Cora dancing in the living room. Ethan's voice was off camera. "You're beautiful. You know that?" Cora laughed, tossing her hair. "You're not filming this, are you?" "For memories," he replied. "You're ridiculous." "I'm serious," he said, stepping into frame. He held the camera low. "I want to remember this forever." Cora smiled, but her smile faltered. Then the video cut. The next clip was darker. Cora was in the same room, tied to a chair, silent, terrified. Ethan's voice was calm. "You shouldn't have changed your mind. You promised." Maeve screamed. Vance slammed the laptop shut. The flash drive became the final nail in the case. More victims identified, families notified. A national task force was formed. The FBI requested jurisdiction. Ethan's case was reopened under serial homicide. But none of it brought Maeve peace, because the video played in her mind over and over. Cora's face, Cora's fear, and the sound of her silence. It was late June when Maeve stood at Cora's grave. They'd finally been able to bury her remains after forensic testing confirmed her identity. A real funeral, a real goodbye. She knelt beside the headstone and placed a single yellow rose on the earth. "You were right about him," she whispered. "And I'm so sorry I didn't see it." The wind whispered through the trees. Maeve stood, clutching a pendant around her neck, a duplicate of the one Ethan had taken, a symbol that Cora's story would not be erased. That fall, Maeve released her book, Familiar Faces, The True Story Behind the Freezer Bride. It became a bestseller overnight. But more than that, it reopened hundreds of cold cases. Women came forward. Families of the missing shared their stories. Cora, the foundation, expanded nationwide. Maeve was invited to testify before Congress about gaps in domestic violence laws, psychological profiling, and the need for early intervention. But nothing compared to the messages from strangers. A mother in Oregon, a sister in Maine, a fiancé in Arizona. All of them wrote the same thing. "Your story saved someone." On the first anniversary of Cora's discovery, Maeve stood by the lake. The house was gone, demolished after the trial. In its place, a memorial garden. Maeve sat on the bench, engraved with Cora's name and the names of the others. 10 total, no longer forgotten. A small girl approached her, holding a single daisy. "Are you the lady who saved all those people?" she asked. Maeve knelt, brushing a tear from her cheek. "No," she said. "I just told the truth." The girl handed her the flower. "Then you're brave." Maeve smiled. Cora's voice was gone, but Maeve's wasn't. And as long as she had breath, she would speak for them all. Because justice wasn't a verdict. It was a legacy, and Cora's would never be silent again.